Just imagine this for a second. You're a soldier, you're thousands of miles from home. You've just come through years of absolutely brutal desert warfare in North Africa. Your own side treated you like you were disposable, your supplies ran out, and now you've surrendered. You are a prisoner of war. And the enemy you're facing, well, you've been told for years that they're weak, decadent, their whole society is collapsing from the inside out. So you're bracing for the worst, right? Starvation, abuse, a total loss of everything. But what if instead of a nightmare, you walked into something so completely different, so profoundly strange, that it made you question everything you thought you knew about the world, about your enemy, and even about yourself? That's what we're digging into today. One of the most unbelievable, overlooked stories of World War II. And it all starts not with a bang, but with the quiet scratching of a pencil on a piece of paper.
Okay, so look at this. This is the heart of it all. These words were written by a Sergeant Joseph Morelli in 1943. He's in a prison camp in a place he's probably never even heard of, Hereford, Texas. And it took 8 months for this letter to get across the Atlantic to his mother in Sicily. Can you imagine her reading this? Mama, they feed us like we are guests, not prisoners. White bread every day, meat, vegetables, more food than we saw in 2 years of war. I cannot understand these Americans. This single letter, it's not just a quote. It's the central mystery of our entire story. It's this raw, unfiltered primary source that just cuts right to the heart of this massive, life-altering shock. What on earth could possibly lead a captured enemy soldier to write something like this?
So yeah, how is that even possible? A prison camp, a place that's defined by barbed wire and guards, how could anyone ever describe that with a word like paradise? Well, that's the big question we're going to answer. And the journey to get there reveals this incredible story about the power of kindness, the shock of unimaginable wealth, and how America, almost by accident, turned tens of thousands of its enemies into some of its biggest fans. And that change would end up shaping the future of both countries in ways nobody could have seen coming.
To really get what Sergeant Morelli was feeling, we have to try and put ourselves in his shoes. For these guys, arriving in America wasn't just, a change of location. It was the complete and total shattering of their reality. It was a shock to the system on literally every level you can think of.
This chart here really shows the disconnect, the huge gap between the world they were told about and the one they actually found. For years, Mussolini's fascist regime had been drilling this propaganda into their heads. America, oh, it's weak, it's decadent, hopelessly divided, and just about to collapse. They were told they were fighting for this glorious new Roman Empire. But the America they actually saw, it was a nation of unbelievable industrial power, an abundance of food and stuff that just defied belief, and a culture of just general kindness and prosperity that didn't make any sense based on what they'd been taught.
And look, we are not talking about a small group of guys here. This was a massive, totally unplanned migration. Over the course of the war, 51,000 Italian prisoners were brought to the U.S. Most of them were captured all at once in May of '43 when the Axis forces in Tunisia finally fell apart. But just stop and think about that number for a second. It's not just a statistic. It's 51,000 people, each with a family, each with their own story, and every single one of them was about to go through this profound personal transformation that would change their lives forever.
The culture shock started immediately. After living on near-starvation rations, the very first thing they got was food. Fresh white bread, canned meat, coffee with tons of sugar. It was a feast. Then came the journey. They crossed the Atlantic on these things called Liberty ships, ships that were built so fast it seemed impossible. And what was on them was even more amazing. Radar, which was this super advanced tech for them, was just standard. And get this, the American sailors had ice cream machines. In ports like Norfolk, Virginia, they'd see these huge parking lots full of cars, and they belonged to the regular factory workers. Then they traveled inland, not in cattle cars like they expected, but on passenger trains, with cushioned seats, dining cars, and porters. It wasn't just a different country, it was like a different planet.
So this initial shock, the sheer amount of stuff and the decent treatment, that was just the beginning. The camps they were sent to were often cleaner and better supplied than their own army barracks. But then, this massive political earthquake happens over in Europe, and it changes absolutely everything. This is where the story takes a huge turn, from just being about prisoners to this unprecedented story of cooperation.
Let's just walk through this timeline, because the speed here is insane. So in May of '43, these guys are enemy soldiers surrendering in Africa. Just 4 months later, their government back in Italy officially surrenders to the Allies. And then, 1 month after that, Italy does a complete 180 and declares war on Nazi Germany. Well, this threw all 51,000 of those POWs in America into this really bizarre legal and moral gray area. I mean, what were they now? They're Their government was an ally, but they were still prisoners of the U.S. The U.S. government saw this weird situation not as a problem, but as a huge opportunity.
And this opportunity led to the creation of the Italian Service Units, or the ISUs, and the idea was totally revolutionary. Italian POWs were given a choice. You can either stay in the camp under the normal rules, or you can volunteer for the ISU. If you volunteer, you're still technically a prisoner, but you'll get to work for the Allied war effort, non-combat stuff obviously, and you'll earn a monthly wage and get a lot more freedom. They were even given new uniforms, almost identical to the American GIs, with just this little green patch on the sleeve that said Italy. It was a chance to get their dignity back, a chance to fight for the liberation of their own country from their old Nazi allies.
So what did they choose? Well, this chart tells the whole story. It was an absolute landslide. Of the 51,000 prisoners, a staggering 45,000 of them, that's 88%, they raised their hands and volunteered. Now, this wasn't just about getting better food or a little bit of money. Think about the psychology here. These men had seen with their own two eyes that all that fascist propaganda was a complete lie. They'd been treated with a dignity they never, ever expected. And now they had a chance to actively fight back against the Germans, who had so often disrespected them in North Africa. Of course they took it. They grabbed that chance with both hands.
And just like that, these new co-belligerents, which was their official title, were sent out from the main camps to hundreds of smaller units all across the country. They went to places that were dealing with huge wartime labor shortages, and they became this essential, powerful, and pretty much secret part of the American war effort right here on the home front.
Just take a second and let this number sink in. 90 million man-days of labor that these men contributed to the war effort between 1943 and 1945. It's a number that's almost too big to really wrap your head around. This was no small token gesture. This was a massive injection of skilled, motivated workers into the American economy at the exact moment it was needed most.
And here's the economic side of it, which is just as mind-blowing. All that labor saved the U.S. government an estimated $230 million back then. In today's money, you're talking well into the billions. So this program wasn't just some nice humanitarian thing. It was a huge strategic and economic win for the war. It was kind of a secret weapon hiding in plain sight.
And the work they did was absolutely vital. I mean, picture this. At the Brooklyn Army Terminal, you have former Axis soldiers working their tails off right alongside American longshoremen, loading the very ships that would supply the D-Day invasion of Normandy. The irony is just incredible. Or imagine them out in the fields of California and the Midwest, saving harvests of fruits and vegetables that were critical for feeding not just America, but all of its allies. They repaired vehicles, they worked in shipyards, they did 1,000 other essential jobs, and the most important part, every single job they did freed up an American GI to go fight on the front lines.
But the real story here, the real impact, goes way beyond labor stats and money. As these 45,000 men moved into communities all over the country, from Utah to Virginia, something really beautiful and totally unexpected started to happen. The lines between prisoner and neighbor, between foreigner and friend, they just started to melt away. These guys weren't just working in America, they started to build lives here.
Now, officially, the rules strictly forbade any kind of fraternization, and especially marriage, between the prisoners and American citizens. But, well, love tends to find a way, doesn't it? Local churches and Italian-American groups started holding these chaperone dances. In some towns, they became the social event of the week. And, of course, romances started. Sympathetic priests would perform secret wedding ceremonies. After the war, hundreds of American women actually followed their Italian sweethearts back to Italy to marry them legally and then eventually brought them back to the States as immigrants. Entirely new families, new generations of Italian Americans were created because of this crazy situation.
And this quote, this one says it all. When the war finally ended and it was time for the men to be sent home, the feeling in a lot of American towns wasn't relief, it was sadness. Local newspapers weren't running headlines about prisoners leaving. They wrote editorials about losing our friends. Whole communities came out to the train stations to say goodbye. The bonds they'd formed over work and meals and dances, they were real. They were deep.
And they left behind a physical legacy, stuff you can still go and see today. A lot of these men were incredibly talented artisans, stonemasons, painters. They completely transformed their surroundings, building these ornate fountains and painting beautiful murals on mess hall walls. In places like Camp Hereford, Texas, they built these stunning chapels out of scrap wood and whatever else they could find, churches that are still standing today. They built theaters, they formed orchestras, they filled their camps with art and music. This wasn't just about killing time. It was this deep human need to create beauty, even in the most unlikely of places.
Which brings us to the final and maybe the most important part of this whole thing, the legacy that's still with us. Because this isn't just some dusty old story from the history books. The impact of these 51,000 men is woven into the fabric of American life today, often in ways you probably don't even realize.
Seriously, their legacy is all around us. The next time you see a game of bocce ball being played in a park, think of them. They're the ones who introduced that game to so many American towns. That authentic pizza and pasta that we all love, well, they helped kickstart that food culture we enjoy today by teaching their neighbors and coworkers how to make the real thing. They inspired Italian cultural festivals in the most unexpected places. And a lot of the men who came back to the US as immigrants started businesses, forging the economic ties that helped rebuild Italy and enrich America.
And the impact on Italy itself was massive. When these tens of thousands of men went home, they didn't just bring back souvenirs. They brought back ideas. They had seen American democracy and industry up close. They learned new farming techniques, new ways of running a factory, a new language. They became these 45,000 accidental ambassadors for a different way of life. And they played a huge role in Italy's post-war reconstruction and its famous economic miracle. You could argue it was the most successful soft power campaign in modern history, and the craziest part is, it was almost entirely an accident.
And so we come all the way back to where we started, with that one confused letter from a prison camp that was called Almost Paradise. The story of these Italian POWs really forces us to ask a pretty big question. In a world that's so full of conflict, what if the most powerful weapon isn't a weapon at all? What if the best way to defeat an enemy's ideology isn't with force, but with an undeniable, real-life demonstration of a better way? This story suggests that kindness can be more strategic than a cannon, and that a loaf of white bread, a fair day's wage, and a simple act of dignity can be the most powerful tools you have for turning an enemy into a friend for life. And that's a lesson that is just as important and just as needed today as it was back in 1943.